On behalf of the Pan American Association of Philadelphia, bienvenidos and welcome to our 84th annual meeting. I am Romy Diaz, the association's board chair. Since 1940, this association has been dedicated to promoting cultural, educational, and economic activities that increase understanding and cooperation among the peoples of the Americas. In recent years, the association has expanded its support for competitive undergraduate scholarships to help develop local Latino talent and meet the region's future workforce needs. Last year, the association also began a thoughtful leadership and governance transition that will position us to deliver on the association's mission well into the future. Against that background, we continued our long-standing tradition of a short membership meeting this morning to elect our 2025 leadership. I'm pleased to report that during the meeting, our officers' slate was re-elected for next year. Ruben Reyes as our president and CEO, Dr. Danielle Shidlow and Charles Humphrey as vice presidents, Arturo Guillen as treasurer, and Diana Larisgoitia as secretary. I ask that our officers please stand and be recognized. I like that wave, Danielle. The members of the board of directors listed in the program book, including officers and myself as board chair, have been elected to the board for 2025. Evelyn Clothier and Admiral Joe Hare have been elected as directors emeriti, joining our board chair emeritus, Abelardo Lecter. I now ask that the members of the association's board of directors and directors emeriti please stand and be recognized. Thank you all for your continued support of the association's mission. And with that short report, I would like to turn the program over to our president and CEO, Ruben Reyes. Ruben?
Thank you so much, Romy. Good afternoon, buenas tardes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Pan American Association's 84th annual members meeting and Clothier Award presentation. We're absolutely delighted to have all of you with us today. My name is Ruben Reyes, and I'm the president of the association. Since its founding in 1940, the Pan American Association has been devoted to its mission of promoting friendship and understanding among the peoples of the Americas. Through our educational programs, we strive to instill the values of tolerance, diversity, diplomacy, cooperation, and scholarship in the next generation of leaders. As an all-volunteer organization, the Pan American Association relies on the unwavering support of our community partners. For 84 years, we have thrived thanks to the generosity of our sponsors and community partners. I want to express my sincere gratitude to our long-term gold sponsor, PICO and Constellation, silver sponsor, FHL Bank Pittsburgh, bronze sponsor, Blank Rum, and the table sponsors noted in your program. To all our community partners, thank you so much for your generous support. In just a moment, we will introduce our keynote speaker and honor our award recipient. But first, I would like to acknowledge the presence of many distinguished guests. I kindly ask you to hold your applause. Members of the diplomatic community, Hugo Hahn Archila, Consul General of Guatemala, Carlos Obrador Garrido Cuesta, Head Consul of Mexico, Edith Schwartz, Honorary Consul of Hungary, Krista Budvidas Bard, Honorary Consul of Lithuania, George Svedu, Honorary Consul of Romania, and Peter Longstreet, Honorary Consul of Uruguay. We also have among us leaders of community serving organizations. Charles McLister, CEO of Elwin, Jennifer Rodriguez, CEO of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Marcos Bolivar and Rosana Arteaga Lopensa of Casa de Venezuela. We have representatives of academic institutions, Dr. Rogelio Miñana of Drexel University, Gloria Angel of Villanova University, and Darío Belot of Harcum College. I'm also pleased to acknowledge the presence of several students from our region's universities and high schools. Additionally, I would like to recognize Lee Roberts and Ab Lecter, former presidents of the Pan American Association, for joining us today. Thank you all for your continued support and for being with us today. And now I would like to invite our chairman, Romulo Diaz, back into the stage to introduce our 2024 William Clothier Award honoree.
Thank you, Ruben. Don't go too far. Since 2003, the association has conferred the William J. Clothier II Award to recognize individuals who have distinguished themselves in their careers and made significant contributions to the Philadelphia Hispanic community. On behalf of the Pan American Association of Philadelphia, I am thrilled to announce that Jennifer Rodriguez is a 2024 Clothier Award honoree. Born and raised in Puerto Rico, Jennifer holds a bachelor's in business administration from Boston University and master's in city and regional planning from the University of Pennsylvania. Jennifer began her career at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C., and worked at PIDC on financing and economic growth initiatives before moving to APM. There she led its quality of life supporting North Philadelphia's predominantly Latino community. I first met Jennifer 11 years ago when she was appointed by former mayor and former Clothier Award recipient Michael Nutter as the founding executive director of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant and Multicultural Affairs to help establish Philadelphia as a welcoming city for immigrants. For the past 9 years, Jennifer has served as the president and CEO of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. At GPHCC, she has been a passionate advocate for over 22,000 Hispanic-owned businesses and a driving force for innovative programs like Build Latino, Dine Latino Restaurant Week, and Éxito Business Journal. In addition to her professional achievements, Jennifer serves on numerous nonprofit boards, including the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and WHYY. And she has received numerous prestigious awards, including the NFL's Hispanic Heritage Leadership Award. Despite a busy career, she enjoys time at home with her partner Sharif in Germantown, where she tends her garden. Mayor Sherelle Parker perfectly captured our own conclusion about today's honoree when she wrote, "Jennifer Rodriguez is a worthy recipient with a deep commitment and a long-standing service to the city of Philadelphia." Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our worthy 2024 William J. Clothier II Award honoree and friend, Jennifer Rodriguez.
Buenas tardes, good afternoon. Thank you to the Pan American Association of Philadelphia for this unexpected honor. I am truly privileged to be recognized for public service, particularly in support of the Hispanic and Latino community, a cause that is not just central to the work that I do, but really very close to my heart. This recognition is not something that I can accept on my own. It reflects the effort of many people, not only the staff of the Hispanic Chamber, my mentors, my family. Without any of them, my work would not be possible. I want to thank the board of the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber as well. It is their tireless work behind the scenes, that their commitment to advancing Latino businesses and their firm belief in our collective vision that drive everything we do. They are the backbone of our success, and this honor belongs as much to them as it does to me. I also owe a very deep sense of gratitude to the mentors who have shaped my journey, many of whom are in this room tonight. I think of Peter Longstreth is here, Romy himself, Al, as we have worked in the AJC. I see many others that I truly owe a lot of my work to. From the earliest days in public service to my work in economic development and now leading the Greater Philadelphia Hispanic Chamber, I have been incredibly fortunate to stand on the shoulders of these great individuals. They have modeled resilience, integrity, and vision, and I hope to carry those values forward as I continue my work. Finally, to my family, especially my partner Sharif, who cannot be here today, they have been my constant support, my source of strength, and the reason I can continue to pursue this work with passion and dedication. Somebody needs to hold the fort at home and feed the dog and feed the cat and be there when I am not. As I reflect on the meaning, and really also keeping me straight, right? Everybody needs somebody at home that will tell you, no, that is not the direction to go, and you know better than that, Jennifer. And so I do appreciate all the people and behind that are so willing to keep me honest. As I reflect on the meaning of this award, I think about the journey that brought me here from Puerto Rico, where my mother was just a teacher, where I was born and raised, to Philadelphia, the city I call home. That journey has not been without its challenges. It's very difficult to leave your home at 17 to come to the mainland to study without really any family around. And to this date, the majority of my family resides at home. So this is something that I've had to do, separated from my family in many ways. The journey has not been without its challenges, as I mentioned, but it has also been fulfilled with opportunity. And it is that opportunity that I am committed to expanding for others. The Hispanic and Latino community in Philadelphia is vibrant, is growing, and it's full of potential. Yet, as we know, potential alone is not enough. It never is. For too long, structural barriers have stood in the way of the success and prosperity our community deserves. It is our responsibility as business leaders, as civic leaders, and advocates to dismantle those barriers and to create pathways for the next generation of Latino leaders and entrepreneurs. The future of our region absolutely depends on it. In accepting this award, and I am reminded that our work is far from finished. This is a call to action. Now, more than ever, we must double down our efforts to ensure that the Latino community has access to the resources, the networks, and the opportunities that lead to real economic empowerment. And this is what drives me every single day. We strive to equip Latino businesses with the tools they need to grow and thrive. We work to foster meaningful connections between Latino entrepreneurs and the broader business ecosystem. And we aim to amplify the voice of the Latino community in every space where decisions that impact our future are being made. But I cannot do this alone. None of us can. I encourage everybody here to consider the role you can play in building an inclusive economy. Whether it is mentoring a young entrepreneur, supporting a Latino-owned business, or advocating for the policies that promote equity and inclusion, each of us has the power to make a difference. The time to act is now. We are in a really critical juncture in our country. We have a unique opportunity to create a brighter future, not only for the Latino community, but for all in Philadelphia. When we invest in the success of our diverse communities, we are investing in the success of the entire region. Thank you once again for this recognition. I am inspired to continue the work even with greater determination, and I am so grateful for your partnership in this journey. Let's move forward together, and let's make sure that the best is yet to come for the Latino community in Philadelphia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer, for such inspiring words. And congratulations again. Next, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for the day. Over the years, the Pan American Association has been honored to welcome many prominent speakers, and today is no exception. It is with great pleasure that we welcome a distinguished journalist, author, and analyst, someone whose career has been dedicated to understanding and communicating the intricate dynamics that shape the Americas. Brian Winter brings with him over 20 years of experience following the political and economic trends of our hemisphere. Since joining the Council of the Americas in 2015, he has served as the editor-in-chief of America's Quarterly, where his leadership helps shape discussions on the region's most pressing issues. As Vice President for Policy at the American Society and Council of the Americas, his work continues to inform investors and policymakers, making him a pivotal figure in Latin American affairs. His career has been shaped by his time living in Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico as a correspondent for Reuters. Fluent in both Spanish and Portuguese, Brian's on-the-ground experience in these countries gives him a unique perspective that goes beyond the headlines. His expertise has earned him the distinction of being called the best foreign expert on Brazil matters in this moment by Global News. As an author, he co-wrote Why Soccer Matters with no other than Brazil's soccer legend Pelé, which became a New York Times bestseller. He also collaborated with former Brazilian President Fernando Henrique Cardoso on The Accidental President of Brazil. He is a regular contributor to television and radio, a sought-after speaker, and the host of the America's Quarterly podcast, where he continues to share his deep insights on the region. And beyond his professional accolades, Brian is also a prolific barbecuer and chef, showing his true Texan roots with a love for grilling that aligns perfectly with his affinity and love for Brazilian churrasco. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to introduce you to our keynote speaker for the 84th Annual Members Meeting, Brian Winter.
Buenas tardes. Boa tarde. Tem brasileiros aqui? No. There, my friend here. And good afternoon. Thank you very much to all of you for the invitation. Ruben, thank you for that kind introduction. It's a dangerous time of year to be exposed as a Texan in Philadelphia, but especially one who grew up in Dallas, but I hope you'll forgive me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'd like to start by trying to explain to you why a kid from Dallas, Texas, is going to talk to you a little bit about Latin America today. I started my career, as Ruben mentioned, as a reporter in Buenos Aires in the year 2000. And for those of you who know your recent Latin American history, you know that was an interesting time to be there. My first job was to cover the Argentine crisis of 2001. This was a period that saw really a political and economic collapse unlike any in the previous 30 or 40 years anywhere in the world. It was a period that saw unrest in the streets, as this photo shows. It was a period that saw 5 presidents in 2 weeks. There was a currency devaluation of 70%. Does anybody here know what the corralito was? The corralito was the banking freeze where they took your deposits. They froze them because of the economic crisis. I lost $3,000 in the corralito. You can imagine, I mean, that's a lot of money to me now. You can imagine what $3,000 was to a 23-year-old reporter who was just starting out. It was a period of political unrest. This is a photo of the helicopter leaving the presidential palace when Fernando de la Rúa, on December 20th, 2001, when he resigned and set off that chain of leadership changes that I described. And as a young reporter, it was quite an education. It was a baptism by fire. And in ensuing years, I lived in Brazil. I was based in Sao Paulo for 5 years. I covered the beginning of the economic problems there, the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff in 2016. I covered the peace talks with the FARC in Colombia. No shortage of things to keep one writing as a journalist. But here's the thing, and here's really the main message I want to leave you with here today. Despite all of those crises, we have seen tremendous development in Latin America over the last 25 years. We've seen a middle class that has expanded by more than 100 million people during that time, according to the World Bank. We've seen countries like Colombia and Chile and Brazil change in positive ways that 25 years ago no one believed was imaginable. We've seen a region that has become more democratic. I was born in 1977. I'm 46 years old. The year I was born, there were only 3 true democracies in Latin America. They were Costa Rica, Colombia, and does anybody know what the third one was? It was Venezuela, ironically, given everything that's happening today. And today, there are only 3 dictatorships in the hemisphere. And that, of course, those are Venezuela, sadly, as well as Cuba and Nicaragua. And so for me, as someone who now is in a different role, I've been since 2015, as Ruben mentioned, I work at the Americas Society, which is a kind of sister organization to yours in New York City, similar in many ways, similar histories. No matter in what way you engage with the region, whether it's through culture or through education or through business, the art of working with Latin America is understanding those crises, but not being blinded by them. You have to always be aware of what's happening on the ground and have your eyes wide open. But if you only focus on them, you'll miss the good stories as well. And there's always, those good stories are always happening, and sometimes they're more important than the bad ones. I feel sometimes like in Washington in particular, there's this impulse, and I was talking about this earlier with some of you, there's this impulse to only focus on the crisis instead of looking where the opportunities are. And so today I want to give you just a brief presentation of 10, 15 minutes or so that's a little bit of an overview of 3 trends that I see in the region right now that reflect some of both the crises and the opportunities in the hope that we can then have a short Q&A, right, Ruben, as you eat your lunch. So I want to talk about three things that are happening in the region right now. And the first one is, without a doubt, a crisis. And look, organized crime, it is not a new issue in Latin America. This one has been around as long as I've been working with the region. But what's happening right now is different. It's scarier in a lot of ways. And I want to talk a little bit about the underlying reasons why. First, though, let me talk about a couple of symptoms. This is an upsetting image that I'm going to take off right away, but this is from Ecuador in January. This was part of an armed uprising by gangs that took over a TV station. That was also a day that saw them engage in shootouts with police and so on. The president declared a state of siege, and it went from there. This is an image of cargo on Mexican highways, the spread of organized crime, the disruptions that it's causing in border regions, but also to economies all over the region is real. Countries that previously had not been as touched by this phenomenon are now very much an epicenter. I'm talking about countries like Chile, which we had previously thought of as a kind of oasis where crime rates are up dramatically. Costa Rica, which we all think of as being something of an exception, is now, according to the UN, the world's leading transshipment point for cocaine bound for the United States and Europe, with homicides up 53% since 2020. Ecuador is also a product of this phenomenon. The geography of all this is changing. And this is one of the big reasons why. This is a graphic showing the production of cocaine in the world since 2010, and it's a number that has doubled. It was already high. That number has doubled. And you can imagine the increase in revenues that this is causing that this is generating for organized crime groups and for cartels. And part of the reason that it is now being so disruptive to countries that were previously outside the major centers is because the geography of demand has also changed. When I first started my career, you could really say with some accuracy that the main consumer markets were in the United States and Western Europe. It's no longer as true as it used to be. What this chart tells you is that we now have as many users of the drug in Latin America and the Caribbean as we do in Europe. And one note just about this number here, the production number, remember that 99% of global cocaine is produced in 3 countries. That's Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru. But the smuggling routes go everywhere. So a big part of the reason we're seeing these disruptions in Ecuador and Chile now is because of cocaine that is flowing south and west. South to other consumer markets. Brazil is now the world's #2 consumer of cocaine by volume, and also to Asia, which has become an increasingly important consumer market as well. And so the disruption that this has caused to politics, to economies, to logistics is tremendous, and something that I hear about in conversations with our members, our member companies at the Council of the Americas all the time. Jonathan Heath, who's the deputy governor of Mexico's central bank, recently said that organized crime is without a doubt the biggest challenge to economic growth in Mexico, but the effects have again been happening region-wide. And I want to talk briefly about the dictator of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, who organized an election at the end of July. Every serious indication tells us that Maduro lost by a large margin of 30 to 40%, and then he resorted to fraud in order to stay in office, ignoring the result completely and forcing the opposition candidate, Edmundo González, who won the election, into exile in Spain. One of the reasons it's so hard to get rid of Nicolás Maduro and the cohort of generals and others who provide his support, it's not just because he and his people fear losing power. It's because they fear going to prison. And specifically, they fear going to a federal prison in the United States because Maduro and about a dozen other officials are under indictment from 4 years ago, charged with drug trafficking, among other crimes here in the United States. And that shows you another way in which this spread of organized crime and drug trafficking in particular has been disruptive to the politics and the economics of the region. So we can talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A if you like, but now I want to talk to you about a positive trend. A few years ago, I was in Brazil speaking to my friend, the former president of Brazil, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who I helped him write his memoir almost 20 years ago now. And I wanted to hear his opinion on how Brazil should manage the growing conflict between, or rivalry, if you will, between the United States and China, and the effect that that has on Brazil and the other countries of Latin America. And, you know, President Cardoso has a very wry sense of humor. And he sort of smiled and he said, well, he said, I think we have to take advantage of Brazil's greatest strategic asset. I said, what's that? He said, well, Brazil is far. And, you know, what he meant by that was Brazil is distant, both geographically and geopolitically, from not only the United States and China, but from some of the world's hot spots for that competition as well. If you look around the global map right now, we have multiple wars going on for the first time in many years. Those wars are blissfully distant from Latin America's shores. And what President Cardoso, the way he was talking about Brazil, could easily be said about Latin America as a whole. This is a region where that is free of, you know, has its share of political conflicts. It is a violent region in many ways, but it does not have a tradition of wars between and among states, and it is distant in many ways, virtually every way, from the wars that we're seeing in Europe and the Middle East. And partly as a result of that, we're seeing multiple data points that suggest that there is interest in Latin America on the part of countries, maybe not so much here in the United States, but other countries around the world that see value in what the region has, whether it's economic or political. This is an image from an investment conference that Saudi Arabia held earlier this year. It came on the heels of a Latin America-focused summit earlier this year in Miami. Let me talk briefly about the example of the Saudis. Among various things that they're doing right now, they're considering a production line for Brazil's Embraer, the aircraft maker. They're planning on opening an embassy in Colombia. Aramco, a company with which I'm sure many of you are familiar, recently acquired a Chilean fuel retailer. And just last year, Saudi announced 26 bilateral deals with Brazil focused on mining and agribusiness. Now, look, this is partly about changes happening in Saudi Arabia, but it does go back to this new great game for resources and the realization that this is, at least for now, a part of the world where investment is welcome from all over the world. And a lot of this has to do with food at a time when the world's middle class is projected to double over the next 3 decades to 3 billion people. As ever, commodities is kind of the name of the game. You do have this competition between global superpowers who are competing for those resources. It's not just the US and China who are referenced in this graphic, but countries like India, Russia, Iran, and others, not all of them with great intentions, but many of them making investments. The biggest investment project happening in the region right now is by the Chinese. They're making a $1.3 billion investment in a deep water port just north of Lima, which could reduce average shipping times from South America to Asia from 45 to 35 days. It's worth noting at the same time that the United States remains the biggest investor in Latin America and the Caribbean, accounting for almost 40% of FDI. I want to show you this number here that reflects some of what I'm talking about here. This is foreign direct investment in Latin America over the last 10 years. You'll see that in 2022, that number hit a 10-year high. But I want to talk about the 2023 number, which was down a little bit. But in percentage terms, That number, almost $200 billion last year, which is the last full year, obviously, that we have information for, that was 15% of inbound foreign direct investment at a global level. It may not sound that impressive, but consider that Latin America is about 8% of the global economy. So it's punching at roughly double its weight in relative terms. And again, it's receiving a higher percentage of that global number than it has for the last 10 years. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about how the United States fits into all of this, maybe Ruben, in the Q&A. But I can tell you that that Washington is worried. I think there's a recognition that the United States is losing both economic and political influence. But the question of what to do about it is a tricky one and will obviously depend on what happens in the next election. And I want to show you one other consequence, and this is partly a result of these favorable global winds that are blowing in Latin America's favor. These are GDP numbers for the last couple of years in the region, including the projections for this year and for next year by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. These numbers are a true case of whether you want to look at the glass as being glass half full or half empty. Because on the one hand, the numbers are clearly better as we come out of the pandemic. I left 2020 and 2021 out because they're kind of all over the place. But if we look, it seems that the region has shifted into a pattern of economic growth at or above 2%. That's better than the 5-year period we had prior to the pandemic. In a global context, it's still not great. It's the slowest growing part of the world as far as emerging markets go. But it is better than where we were in the years prior to the pandemic. And then the third and final trend that I want to talk to you about is climate change. I've been reporting on politics and economics now for almost 25 years. I consider myself more of an analyst now than a journalist. And I'm going to confess to you that I have traditionally thought of climate as being somewhat separate from politics. I knew that climate was an important issue, but I didn't really think of it as a fundamental part of all of this, this way of looking at Latin America and the world that I'm describing to you today. This year changed my mind. And I want to talk about some specific reasons why. This is an image from Porto Alegre, Brazil. This was flooding that happened back in April. The city had never seen anything like this before. This is a city, this is a metro area of 4 million people, a major regional capital. And I have not actually verified this in the last, but as of at least 2 weeks ago, maybe today, the airport in this city was still closed 6 months later as a result of this flooding. This did not get nearly the attention in the U.S. media that I and others think it deserved, in part because Porto Alegre is one of those cities that many people cannot find on a map. And I get it. It's not, Brazil is, a little bit of a mystery to Americans sometimes in particular, but this was a major story. It's happening at the same time that fires in the Amazon at present are at a 10-year high because of the worst drought in some regions of the country in at least 700 years. This was a BBC map that was current a couple of weeks ago that showed active fires happening in the country right now. This has had a huge effect on the economy, on conservation, and so on. This is an image from Sao Paulo at that time, which according to some measures was the world's most polluted city as a result of those fires, even more polluted in these days than New Delhi and Beijing. But look, it's not just Brazil. Earlier this year, there was a drought in Mexico that prompted talk of water rationing in Mexico City. There was a drought in the Panama Canal, which I'm sure many of you know, disrupted shipping through that area. This is an image from the canal during that time. Chile also had crippling fires earlier this year. It became a major issue for President Boric. And I'll come back again to Ecuador, which right now is having electrical blackouts of more than 8 hours a day because of the drought, because of a lack of water in the hydroelectric dams. And that may well prevent the current president, Noboa, from being reelected next year. So again, these are issues, these are not just climate issues. These are not just tragedies for the millions of people who accept them. These are big enough issues happening across multiple countries in a region that scientists say and development economists say is particularly susceptible to climate change, that it's having a huge impact on politics as well. This is just one other image here. This is from Bogota earlier this year, where there was water rationing during that time. If any of you have ever been to Bogota, where it rains all the time, you're as flabbergasted as I was that they had to do water rationing there. But again, that's the historic scale of what's happening right now across multiple countries. And here's one more example. You know, it's a longer story, but Argentina had a drought last year that had an impact on the harvest, that made the economy worse, and probably contributed to the margin of victory that Javier Milei saw when he won the presidency last year. So final conclusions before we get to the Q&A, very basic here. Crime and climate, I now think, are big risks to this more positive picture, these more positive numbers that I was talking about with Latin America's economies. The second thing is the global winds are blowing in Latin America's favor right now, and you've got investors and others all over the world who are excited about that, who are recognizing it, who are appreciating it, and acting on it despite these crises. And then the third most important point is, if you remember nothing else from my comments here today, please remember that when you're reading or listening to somebody talking about a crisis in Latin America, that are good things happening as well. There are good trends, and it's just as important that we focus on those. Thank you very much.
So we would like to have about 10-15 minutes of Q&A. Brian will be happy to answer all your questions. Does anybody have any question? If not, we have right here our honoree.
Jennifer, first of all, congratulations for your award today. And you were a tough act to follow on this stage. It was a wonderful speech. The question for those, could everybody hear, or should I briefly, let me try to briefly restate. Jennifer was at a recent event speaking with U.S. Hispanic Chamber, and this person was saying that the future of the global economy is Africa. And Jennifer's question was, well, what about Latin America? And presumably, what about Latinos here in the United States as well? And look, the Latino community in the U.S. continues to evolve in surprising and I think inspiring ways. The United States is now the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, behind Mexico. So bigger than Colombia, bigger than Argentina, bigger than Spain. And I think that businesses, some of them get it, Jennifer, and some of them are still kind of struggling to catch up a little bit. It's a community that, of course, is very diverse and that has many different stories. Ruben mentioned that I host a podcast. Our most recent episode was with Maria Arana, who wrote a wonderful book called Latino Land, which I recommend to all of you. It's a kind of survey of all the different communities that make up the Latino population in the United States. And she talks about, you know, communities that have been here for hundreds of years, going back to before the United States was even founded, to the more recent arrivals that we've seen over the last 30 and 40 years. She talks about how when she first arrived in from Peru in the United States in the 1950s, Latinos were only about 2% of the US population. Today, that number is almost 20%. So that's a big change in one lifetime, and it's one that continues to happen with the arrival of people from Venezuela, from Cuba, from Colombia, and so on. You know, look, I, at some level, have dedicated my career to the notion that we should have a better understanding and appreciation for the region. But it's hard. I was telling Ruben before we started that, you know, I'm friends with some people in the Latin America space in both parties, in both the Biden administration and the former Trump administration. I'm disappointed to tell you that that Secretary of State Anthony Blinken wrote a recent essay for Foreign Affairs. This came out about 2 weeks ago. That was an attempt to capture the diplomatic achievements of the Biden administration. It was 5,500 words long. The word Mexico appeared 0 times. And Latin America was mentioned, I think, 2 or 3 times. And, you know, unfortunately, this is somewhat typical. I hope that the next administration, whoever it does a better job paying attention, because not only the potential is there, but as I was saying during the presentation, Latin America is many things. It is a vibrant consumer market. It is a natural partner for the United States. And it has the resources that the world needs for these next 20 or 30 years of economic growth and expansion of the middle class. Yeah, no, thank you for your question. How lucky you are to live in a state where your votes count. I'm up in New York. Rather than try to reveal my personal preference, let me talk just a little bit about what we might expect depending on which government wins, and some things that actually won't change depending on what happens, with regard, of course, to Latin America and policy toward Latin America. And I think it's important. I travel in the region a lot, and as you can imagine, this year, this is all anybody wants to talk to me about. And I always start by recognizing that 8 years ago, I and many others got it wrong, specifically with regard to what a Trump victory might mean for Mexico. I think that there was a belief that was very common at the time that because of what former President Trump, then candidate Trump, was saying about Mexico and Mexicans, that it would result in a hostile relationship between the United States and Mexico. This was not an irrational thing to believe, especially when Andrés Manuel López Obrador won the presidential election in Mexico 2 years later in 2018, after, and people forget this, after having written a book during the campaign that was called Oye Trump, which means like, hey Trump. And it was a long book full of his thoughts on why Trump was looking at Mexico the wrong way. And many of us said at the time, buckle up your seatbelts, here we go. In practice, it ended up being very different. López Obrador and Trump, I think it's too much to say that they became friends, but they were able to understand each other, respect each other, and have a relationship that was transactional. And NAFTA was ended, but it was replaced with UMCA, a trade deal that some people believe is better in many respects. And so that's a long-winded way of saying I'm not totally sure what a Trump victory would mean this time. But I have noticed in the last 2 weeks that he's been speaking in very specific ways about things including 200% tariffs on Mexican autos. That's not very consistent with the trade deal that he negotiated when he was president the first time. Does he want to blow that up? None of us quite know. And you know, the whole nearshoring story in Mexico, the potential there is enormous, but there are some investments on hold right now for a variety of reasons. And one of them is the uncertainty of what will happen here in the United States. I joke sometimes that the U.S. is the world's new emerging market, just because it has this level of political risk that we didn't always have when it came to our politics, especially when it came to our relationship with the country that is now our biggest trading partner, which is Mexico. But I do think that there are some specific impacts from this election. Another one that I would mention is green energy. Latin America has lithium and many of the other rare earths and other minerals that are necessary for the energy transition. I showed you those foreign direct investment figures and how they are kind of at decade highs right now. Well, the biggest single category of investments of that FDI is in green energy and goods related to the green transition, specifically green hydrogen and green ammonia. So if we have a president who says he does not believe in climate change and who is promising to reverse some of the Biden-era mandates on electric cars, for example, that will have consequences for the region as well. I also think, as someone who mostly follows Brazil, it's clear that the first time around, Donald Trump inspired many imitators in other parts of the world, specifically Latin America. I personally believe, sometimes I have Brazilian friends who disagree with me, but I believe that if Donald Trump had not been elected in 2016, I think it's very unlikely that Jair Bolsonaro would have been elected president of Brazil in 2018, because Bolsonaro was very much a consequence of Brazilians who looked at that model and said, that's something that could work here. So we may see another wave of politicians in that style as well. So lots of consequences to talk about, but those are the ones that I'm most focused on. I think that my personal belief right now, having recognized that I wasn't right the first time around, I think that business leaders here in the U.S. may be underestimating the possibility of a big disruption to USMCA if President Trump is reelected. So the question, for those who didn't hear, was essentially about this judicial reform that was recently approved by the Mexican Congress and the impact that that might have on investment. And this is a subject that is very front of mind for almost everyone following Mexico right now. I think it's important to note first that President López Obrador, who passed this in his final weeks in Congress, left office with a very high approval rating, somewhere in the mid-60s, which in today's politics is almost a miracle. You remember the last time an American president had an approval rating in the mid-60s? I would guess it was probably President Bush right after 9/11, but it didn't last very long. There are other leaders in the region, in Latin America, who are at or near or above that level. Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, for example, is somewhere probably in the 80s, but there aren't many. And I mention this because his successor, his preferred successor, the Lithuanian-descended Claudia Sheinbaum, won with an overwhelming mandate. And this judicial reform that they're doing was on the table during that process. So, I think Mexico has the sovereign right to make the reforms that it sees fit. You have a government with a large mandate, and so on. Now, just as the Mexican government has the right to make that reform, and for those who are not familiar, this is a reform that, among other things, would result in elections, direct elections, to elect the members of the Mexican Supreme Court, as well as several thousand other judicial positions at the state and local level throughout Mexico. You could almost say that it would result in all of the current judges being fired. That's not quite true, though, because those judges will have the right to run for office again. But it's possible that it will result in all of them being fired and in direct election, some of which we do here in the United States. We elect district attorneys, we elect judges in some states. But direct elections to the Supreme Court, the only other country, the only other democracy that does that is Bolivia. So it's definitely an experiment. But just as the Mexican government has the sovereign right to pass that reform, investors have the right to put projects on hold if they're worried about the implications. And the current concern is that, companies and others that have disputes with the Mexican government, with the Mexican state, whether it's at the federal or state level, can currently count on some sort of recourse with an independent judiciary. The concern is that if you have directly elected judges, that they'll be beholden to whatever party is in power or other interests in the country, and that could have a corrosive effect on the investment climate. I was in Mexico in July before this reform was passed, and what I heard was a pretty optimistic rendering of what to expect from then President-elect Sheinbaum. There's this view still that she will take a different approach to organized crime, keeping in mind that President Lopez Obrador, his sexenio, his 6 years in office, saw the highest accumulated number of homicides of any previous Mexican president. There is also a belief that she will have a more progressive, I suppose you could say, policy mix toward the energy transition, towards green energy, remembering that she was actually part of a team of UN climate scientists that won the Nobel Prize some years back. But I can tell you, so I was there during that period of the transition, and I spoke to people from the governing party, from Morena, from the opposition, from the business community, and so on. I talked to everybody. It's part of what I do. The optimism that was there during that time has been overshadowed in recent weeks by concerns over this judicial reform. So it's really, cast a bit of a chill on some of these initiatives and some of the nearshoring potential and other things. But, we'll see. 6 years is a long time. And there's still the investors who follow that edict of looking at the crises, but also understanding the opportunity. I talked to them, and they're in the process of trying to understand exactly what this means and how much it changes that matrix that they look at. No, thank you for your question. So look, on Venezuela, Venezuela is a tragedy. I mean, we've seen an exodus of a quarter of the population in the last 10 years. It is a dictatorship where, a New York Times correspondent wrote a book that came out last year, William Newman. The book's title was "Things Are Never So Bad That They Can't Get Worse." And it was about Venezuela. He had been a correspondent there, and he was quoting that quote came from, I believe, a Venezuelan government official. And you had an environment that was already repressive, that went through the whole cycle with Juan Guaido being declared by, I think it was 34 different countries and entities around the world, including not just the Trump administration, but by Justin Trudeau's Canada and the European Union and others. So this was not just some, Republican idea. This was something that at the time in 2018, 2019 actually had quite a lot of consensus behind it. And yet what's happened since this election that they held and then ignored in July is that things have gotten even worse for members of the opposition and for the Venezuelan people themselves. I am, as I think you can tell, an optimistic person, but I say sometimes that I'm a serial pessimist when it comes to Venezuela, and I've never been wrong. And the reason for that is, I think, a lesson for all of us everywhere in the world, which is that once an authoritarian government gets consolidated, it's very difficult to get rid of. We saw this in Cuba. We still see this in Cuba, where the Castros and their descendants have been in power for 60 years and counting. And I've always believed that was the model that the Venezuelans, 65 years and counting, actually. And that is very clearly the model that the Venezuelans have as well. They have no intention of letting go of power. The question becomes, what can the United States and the rest of the world do about it? And that's more complicated. I think that it exposes an issue that nobody in Washington likes to talk about, whether they're Republicans or Democrats. It is the least popular subject in any crowd, and that is the limitations of American power. Nobody likes this subject, because unless the United States, people sometimes talk about the most extreme measure that you could think of, which would be some kind of U.S. military intervention that would topple Maduro and bring the rightfully democratically elected leader to power? Well, first of all, Venezuela is a country that's even bigger in territory than Iraq. Second of all, I don't personally, in fact, I'm certain that there's not appetite in today's America for sending our sons and daughters to go die for the cause of Venezuelan democracy, no matter how just I believe that cause to be. So short of that, what are the other mechanisms? Well, there's sanctions. Some of those are being considered right now. But the question that the Biden administration has had to grapple with is if you were to, for example, restore the oil sanctions that were originally passed during the Biden administration, or I'm sorry, during the Trump administration, as part of that maximum pressure campaign, will it help? Or will it just make life more difficult for people there on the ground? Are you doing it because you think it will topple the regime? Or are you satisfying some sort of political and institutional imperative to do something? And the Biden administration, as far as I know, is of the clear belief that they can pass individual sanctions to make sure that relatives of the more than 2,000 generals in the Venezuelan armed forces, which is, by the way, more than all the NATO countries put together. It's no secret how he's maintained his corrupt power structure over the years. It's by promoting these people and giving benefits to them and their families. But, you know, there are things that you can do to make sure that their cousins and granddaughters and others cannot be spending those misbegotten funds in places like Saint-Tropez. But when it comes to things like withdrawing oil licenses for American companies that are pumping oil, that's a more difficult question. Because if you withdraw that money, you're going to make conditions worse for Venezuelans on the ground. You're likely to prompt more migration out of the country. And oh, by the way, you're probably going to be, you're certainly going to be handing more control over time of the world's largest proven oil reserves to other countries, including China, Russia, and Iran. So these are the trade-offs that policymakers of all kinds have to make. I don't know where Donald Trump is on it this time around. I think he faces an imperative to be tough. I would expect that he would be, quote unquote, tougher than the Biden administration has been, but I don't know that it'll be any more effective because, again, this depressing conclusion, I really don't want to end with this, by the way, but this very depressing conclusion that once a dictatorship comes and gets its roots in and has shown that it's indifferent to global opinion and that it's willing to oversee malnutrition, hunger, and the exodus of a quarter of its population, like Venezuela has, there's actually very little the world can do in order to really make a difference. Are we really going to end like that? Oh, gosh. Come see me afterwards, and we'll keep talking.
Thank you so much, Brian. And I would like to invite Romy Diaz to come to the podium for a little token of appreciation. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Next time, we'll talk about Pele.
So thanks again to our keynote speaker for your insightful remarks and your thoughtful answers. It's truly been an honor and pleasure to have you with us today. Let's give him another round of applause, please. As we conclude today's program, I would like to extend my deep appreciation to the many individuals that have made this event possible. The officers and board of directors of the Pan American Association, countless volunteers who contributed in so many ways to make today's event a success. I would like to give a special thanks to Romy Diaz, Ab Lecter, and Daniel Shidlow for your invaluable help and advice. And a most heartfelt thank you to Denise Kushevsky for always taking the heavy load and making sure that the trains run on time. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you agree this has been a memorable 84th annual meeting. The Pan American Association has long been a beacon of hope in Philadelphia and beyond, dedicated to advancing knowledge, understanding, and engagement among the peoples of the Americas. In that spirit, I encourage you to consider becoming a member if you haven't already done so, and support us in any way that you can. Your support is the lifeblood of our organization, and it enables us to continue the important work ahead. Once again, congratulations to our honoree, Jennifer Rodriguez, and thank you to our keynote speaker, Brian Winter. And we look forward to seeing you at our upcoming events. And also, please stay tuned for the launch of our new website before the end of the year. And until then, enjoy the holidays and have a great day.